I'm thrilled to introduce you all to Dr. Matthew A. Weed, who is a fellow at Yale University. And you are blind and a diabetic. And you have 2 master's degrees, one from Princeton, one from Harvard, and there's no stopping you. Is that correct?
As much as I can avoid being stopped, yes.
Right, let's tell the folks a little bit about your life. At 6 weeks old or so, you had surgery on some congenital cataracts. Then what happened?
So at that time, the techniques weren't particularly good, and the doctor, who was an excellent doctor out in Colorado, which is where I was born and grew up, was concerned that he wouldn't be able to save my vision even at that point. At age 1, my mother, actually, who is not a doctor, diagnosed my diabetes, and she picked it up because my father was a diabetic. And so then they took me into the hospital and checked me out, and yep, he's a diabetic, sure enough. And at that time, they gave Mother a 50-50 odds that I would survive to get to my 5th birthday.
Really?
Because at that age, you can't communicate that you're having a low blood sugar.
Sure.
You can't communicate that your blood sugar's high. So except for testing you, there's really nothing that they can do. And in 1971, we didn't have home blood work. We didn't have home blood glucose monitoring. All we had was little pee strips that you would pee on, and then it would give you a range of between 0 and 4. And that was all that we could tell. And 4 could mean a blood sugar that was a little high, or it could mean a blood sugar that was outrageously, dangerously high. So I would occasionally have grand mal seizures as a result of those high blood sugars. I was in the hospital 3 Christmases in a row in different comas, but still in a coma. So by the time I actually managed to get to school, we thought that was pretty lucky.
And you were what age then? And your sight was slowly going at that point?
Yeah.
How old are you now?
43.
And back when it started to go, do you remember visions and then it's slowly slipping away from you?
I remember, I wouldn't say I remember things slipping away. I certainly remember colors. I remember what people look like. If somebody says to me, and Nyberg is blonde, I can go, okay, yeah, that.
You're right.
I can do that. Well, I cheated and I found that out from somebody, but still, I know what that looks like as opposed to if you were a brunette.
So you go to school, the sight is starting to go away, you're dealing with diabetes. How do you go through the stages of starting to lose your sight and be a teenager and start to be a young adult? How do you do that?
Well, I'd lost my vision actually by the time I was 8. So in some senses, I didn't have some of the crises that your average teenager is going to have who, say, has just been diagnosed with diabetes and is suddenly being told, as kind of was the case for my father, that their life is now going to change and that half of the things that they like to do, they can't do anymore because either eating them is bad for them or doing that activity without proper planning ahead of time is really bad for you. So in some senses, I don't want to call it lucky, but I was fortunate that I didn't have to confront some of those issues right at that very struggle-focused time of being a teenager.
So at 8 years old, you lose your sight.
Yep.
How does one go to school? How does one learn? How did you do this?
Well, things have changed a lot since when I was in school. When I started, we started me with a machine called a visual tech, which could blow up print to enormous size on a screen, and then I could read that. Once my vision was totally gone, obviously we were teaching me how to use Braille, and that included learning how to use a Braille writer, which
and this is over here. I'm going to hand this to you. This is. I'm going to move your computer
this
back.
Device. Yep.
Yeah.
And the Braille writer has 6 keys that make dots, and by knowing whether the dots are present or absent, that's how you tell what letter you're reading, what character you're reading. There's a space bar, there is a backspace key, and there's a carriage return. And that's all that you have on a fairly standard Braille writer like this one.
Is there enough Braille for folks like you in the world? More things need to have Braille. Is that correct? Would you say that?
I'm fairly forward-looking in this area. I think that we need to be teaching young kids who can't see how to use the computer first, and then teach them Braille later. Because I learned how to read print, and young people who cannot see, who know how to read print, or who can read the equivalent of print on the computer, are going to be able to be far more able to interact with their sighted peers and colleagues than somebody who learns Braille first and then learns how to use the computer.
Okay, let's move this out of the way. You're going to give this to me. That's good. Now let's go to the computer.
Yep.
And I want you and I were talking back and forth through email, and you were answering so quickly. What devices do you have on your computer that allows you to do what you're doing?
All of the tools that I have on my computer are software-based tools. That didn't always used to be the case, but over the last 20 years or so, it's pretty much been consistent that you could buy a computer, and as long as it had enough processor power to accept the accessibility software, which does take a lot of processor to do its job, the computer can read things to you without any more modifications. I should say that the software is extremely expensive. And right now, the state of Connecticut has the ability to give that kind of software to its blind citizens in order to help them find jobs, in order to help them interact on the internet, in order to help them be as independent as possible.
Now, I found this very interesting. If you will, just demonstrate a bit. You get audio from writing. So demonstrate that for us.
I put a sentence together earlier today that describes you and what you do here at Channel 8, and I'll let at WTNH, and I'll let the computer read that to everybody so that they have a sense.
And Nyberg anchors the 6P Diane news on WTNH TV left for ABC right for Canada. 10 o'clock hour news on my TV 9.
So that was a one sentence that basically describes you and what you do.
Which I pointed out, it says that I do the 10 o'clock news and I do the 6 o'clock news. You are having to train your ear to listen to something that's going so fast.
Correct. And obviously I wasn't using the computer at this speed when I first started out. And when I started out, actually, with a computer, it was on an old Apple IIe in 1982. And then I moved to a Mac when I got to Yale. And in fact, some of your viewers may even remember stories about me and my friend Victor Grigoriev, who was a year ahead of me as a Yale undergraduate, when we put together the Yale text scanning system, which is basically a tool that allowed any text in the Yale libraries to be scanned using an optical scanner, which is basically a photocopier for a computer, into electronic format so that then the computer could read it. Because of course in 1990-91, most books were not available either in audio tape format or certainly not in electronic format. So we had to bridge that.
Let's talk a bit. We've talked about the computer and the Braille reader. How did you get to Yale? I would describe you as pretty brilliant. I'm just going to go ahead and go there. Okay. You can say, okay, gee,
sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, blush, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How'd you get to Yale? Did you just spend tons of time studying and using, the instruments that were put before you to help you get through life?
To some degree. I think anybody who gets to a university like this would say that they did a lot of that kind of work. I was fortunate in that my mother is a school teacher, and so she understood the system really well, and we were able to give me, I don't want to say any extra benefits, but we were certainly able to take advantage of everything that was in the school district because Mom knew what was there. And she could ask for things that a lot of other people wouldn't necessarily be able to ask for because they wouldn't know to ask for them. So in that sense, I was very fortunate. I also was fortunate in that my family in Colorado is relatively well connected, and that certainly helped us get access to things that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to.
So you get to Yale and you major in what?
Political science and almost in biology.
What do you mean almost?
Well, I would have completed the biology major except for that for reasons of Yale's accreditation, bio majors have to take physics. And I'd taken all the upper level classes already, and I saw absolutely no reason why I should have to take physics. So on principle, I told the director of undergraduate studies, who I believe is still at the university, that, and he was right to say this, that I needed to do things this way. But I told him, if it's a difference between my getting the major and not, am I taking physics or not, I'm not going to take physics and I won't get the major.
I love it. Attitude. I love this. So what are you doing with your life right now? You're a fellow at Yale.
I'm a health policy fellow in the Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics. I'm also a laboratory associate in the Department of Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology.
I can't even say that, let alone, get that out. But what is your end goal? What are you trying to do with your life, with all these degrees from the Ivy Leagues?
Well, I'm very concerned, and I've become more and more concerned over time about how we're training how we're preparing our young health professionals to get out into the real world. So along with writing some short papers on new cost-effective ways to get young health professionals exposure to how people with chronic health issues, and that, by the way, is almost 150 million Americans have some kind of chronic health challenge or other. So getting them exposure to how these people live and work every day, because our health professionals learn very well how to manage chronic illness in the hospital. They manage very well geriatrics and all kinds of other things well in the hospital. But once that patient leaves the hospital, most health profession schools don't do a very good job of preparing their students, their graduates, to work with patients once they've left that clinical space where everything is controlled.
So that's where you're headed.
Exactly.
That's where.
Yeah.
Now, we have a picture of you skiing, which, after talking to you, doesn't surprise me. We've got you skiing here, and it says blind skier, which is obviously a safety.
Yep.
This is a picture with two other women. I think it was in Austria. Where was that?
I'm going to have to ask you, Anne, to describe the two other women for me to tell you which.
Well, let's put it this way. You've skied in how many places?
Austria, New York, Vermont, Colorado. That's it.
Well, that was my point. You've skied pretty much everywhere. How does that work when one cannot see? You have the trust of everybody around you. You've learned to trust people. Is that correct?
Well, I've learned to trust my sighted guide. I've learned to trust the ski guide, whoever that may be. As far as other skiers on the slope, a lot of skiers are not very respectful, and I hate to say it, but that's even more true in my experience of snowboarders. And they can actually be a fairly significant danger to me, and that's one of the things that the guide has to be paying very, very close attention to.
You said to me, to live your life, you have these machines and devices that help you do what it is you have to do, but you also said to me that people come to you. They help you. They're there for you. What are you, a magnet? You just draw these people in? I mean, you couldn't do what you could do without help, correct?
No, of course not. No, of course not. And we're all interdependent. This TV station doesn't run just because you're sitting here anchoring the news. There are a whole lot of people behind the scenes who make things work. My volunteers are actually much less behind the scenes than, in many ways, the staff here is. Without their help in helping me to monitor my blood glucose and draw my insulin dosages, and particularly with the blood glucose monitoring, there's no way to do that for a totally blind person, because you have to get a little itty bitty strip that's literally about 1/10 of an inch deep by maybe 1/4 of an inch across to where your blood is. And in my case, I've stuck my finger so many times that half the time you won't even get blood out of my finger on the first go. So to get the blood to the strip, somebody with vision has to do that.
Sure.
Otherwise, you don't get an accurate reading. And then insulin dosages have to be drawn as well.
How is your health?
It's actually really good. Most of that because I have chosen consciously to be disciplined about things. I don't do all the things that diabetics shouldn't do. I don't drink. Diabetics absolutely should not drink alcohol. I don't eat a lot of unnecessary sugar. I exercise all the time. 5 to 6, sometimes 7 times a week.
What's your one vice? Because you sound too perfect to me.
Diet Dr. Pepper.
That's great. Okay, so you allow yourself that.
Yes.
Tell me about a book that you're putting together. What's it about? And let's talk, do you have a title?
Well, we kind of are working on two possible titles. One, which was actually suggested by my old residential college dean in Silliman, is Seeing the Right Thing to Do. The other is I Can Help You With That. We're not sure which direction we're going to go yet.
What's it about?
The
Tell me
book
what it's
is about it takes my life story and it takes the stories of about 100, it's actually going to be just a little bit over 100, of the people who've chosen to get involved in my life. Most of them have chosen. Some of them have been forced by their jobs or whatever to get involved. To get involved in my life and help me at kind of key signatory moments, like my ski instructor from when I was in Colorado is going to be in the book. Friends who encouraged me to do my rollerblading marathon when I did that in 1999 will be in the book. A friend who, several of the people who've been ski guides for me will be in the book. People that I saw on my round the world trip when I did that in 2009 will be in the book. And all of these people, many of them are former students, are former volunteers whom I've worked with and who I've stayed close with over the years.
Is this a book of gratitude? Is that what you're doing?
It's a book, I want it to be more a book of inspiration. I think we all can and should be more involved in our communities and in the lives of people around us than most of us choose to be. I think we would be much better getting up off of the couch and not watching TV or baseball or football or whatever it might be that we do, and getting out into our communities and saying to people, I can help you with that. I can make a difference. And by doing that, and my students, I think, will say this, and I know they'll say this in the book, will say that by knowing me, by knowing people that they've interacted with, it makes a huge difference in their lives, not only in terms of what kind of doctor they're going to be or what kind of school they're going to teach or whatever, but just how they think about other people. And I think, especially in today's world of being isolated by the internet and able to just hunker down behind your computer all the time, it's extra important that people be encouraged and inspired to get involved in their community.
Well, Matthew, you are an inspiration. Thank you so much for coming in. I know I could talk to you for another hour, but we're running out of time just a little bit. But thank you so much for coming in, and continue with your lovely, wonderful spirit in all that you're doing.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.